Hello listeners, and welcome to Plugged In, the energy news podcast from Montel, where we bring the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. Today's episode is a special edition, recorded against the backdrop of rapidly shifting events in the Gulf. With geopolitics evolving by the hour, it's important to note that this conversation was recorded this morning, on Thursday, the 9th of April, and reflects the situation at that precise moment in time. We unpack the implications of a fragile ceasefire and what it could mean for global energy markets, from uncertainty around LNG flows and shipping routes to the critical role of Qatar's Ras Laffan facility. The stakes could not be higher. So, with that context in mind, a ceasefire that may or may not hold, LNG infrastructure still offline, and shipping routes far from secure, the question is, what does this mean for energy markets now and in the months ahead? Setting the scene for us today in this special episode on the Gulf crisis is Laurence Walker, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Montel News. A warm welcome back to the podcast, Laurie. It's a very busy time.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, it is indeed a busy time.
We're focusing primarily on the ceasefire that's just over 24 hours old. How significant is it? Is it genuinely a turning point for energy markets, or are we seeing an initial reaction that's sort of running ahead of the action or the activity on the ground?
I think it's certainly is a very important development. It's something which I guess the market has been hoping for. What remains to be seen is quite what's included in the ceasefire and how the negotiations go. So as we saw initially, news of the Strait of Hormuz potentially being opened as a result of this, we've yet to see traffic going through it, or LNG traffic at least. And there seems to be obviously some points of contention as well. There's, whether, for example, attacks on Lebanon are included in the ceasefire or not. And so I think until some of these points get ironed out, we're not really going to know quite how much water this ceasefire will hold, and also how long it will, will it last beyond the 2 weeks? And that's what we really need to see a substantial change to the market situation.
And there seems to be a lot of noise, or maybe some seems of misinformation even about vessels going through the straits in recent days. What are you seeing?
Well, last week we did see a ballast, one without LNG on board, heading to Oman. It sort of clung to the Omani coast and sort of snuck through. I haven't yet seen laden vessels officially going through. We have, I think, 14 vessels sat sort of within the Persian Gulf waiting to go. But, I mean, looking at the screen here beside me, we can't see any really edging much closer than they had been in the last day or two for now. So I think they're waiting. There's a lot of caution. There's a lot of waiting to see, will it be safe to go through? Will they have to pay a toll? Is the insurance there for them? What kind of guarantees there are? Because a ship owner is not going to put his ship through until all of these answers have been given.
And certainly the opening of the straits there doesn't seem to be, it seems to be going to be very expensive or very costly for those ship owners and the insurance. And the other aspect as well, Laurie, is that, one thing is opening the Strait of Hormuz, but this actually, as you have reported on Montel News, saying that it means very little without an actually Qatari restart of production, LNG production. So can you sort of explain why Ras Laffan is the critical piece of this puzzle, and it's not something that's likely to come back anytime soon?
Yes, well, let's not forget Ras Laffan is a massive export production and export facility. It provides getting on for 20% of global LNG supply. It's offline at the moment. It's not working. They stopped production soon after the war began. It will take a while, weeks to return production and start exporting again. This 2-week window doesn't really provide that length of time. So I think they will probably want to see guarantees of there being more or a longer ceasefire, or hopefully even more signals of an end to the conflict than this. Because if everything kicks off again after 2 weeks and they've just got themselves up and running, it's going to be all for nothing, as it were. So I think it needs to be longer. It needs to be very very clear how gas is going to get out of the region through the strait before we can really sort of see those big volumes coming out again, and that's going to take probably time.
And that requires a level of certainty and predictability that's just not there at the moment.
Exactly. I think while there's a lot of uncertainty, there's no one really knows quite what's going to be included, and while there's a chance of a sort of stray missile or something or other hitting a tanker, there's going to be a lot of caution.
Laurie, thanks very much for your input there.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm very happy to be joined in this special episode on events in the Gulf, the very fast-moving situation, by Anna-Maria Jaller-Makarewicz, who's lead energy analyst at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. A warm welcome to you, Anna-Maria.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And also joining us is Arne Lohmann-Rasmussen, who's chief analyst at Global Risk Management. A warm welcome to you too, Arne.
Thank you.
So we are recording on Thursday morning. It's been barely 24 hours since the ceasefire was announced. It's looking quite flimsy, especially with Iran's reaction to the Israeli bombing of southern Lebanon and Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon. Anna-Maria, what's your take on this ceasefire? How fragile is it?
I think it's very fragile. This is showing us that the LNG market is still very much at risk with the supply being disrupted. Even if the ceasefire is reached, we still are going to have some gas that is not going to be able to be transported. So there's already some disruptions on the Qatari LNG facilities. Even they have reported that some of them could take 5 to 6 years to be repaired. So even if it happens today, we are not going to go back to the situation 2 months before. So we are right now experiencing another reality where we have a lack of LNG in the world, and these negotiations are not a guarantee that the flow will be the same.
I think we'll come back to some of those points later, especially on LNG production and exports from the Gulf. But Arne, what do you make of the current situation? How flimsy is this shaky ceasefire?
It is, as you said, very shaky, and it's hard to see them to reach any agreement. They don't even agree on what was actually the sort of starting point of the negotiations. For example, this 10-point plan. So I'm really concerned that this will end up in that the war will start again in 2 weeks' time, or even before. We saw that during the first negotiations, just before the war started, they were actually relatively close to an agreement, and then suddenly the war broke out.
So do you expect it to last 2 weeks, this ceasefire?
And that's impossible to say. Let's see what happens on Friday. But one thing that's actually gives me a bit of comfort that this may succeed is that it's quite obvious that Trump is trying to get out of this some way or the other. Of course, he's trying to frame it as a big victory, but the truth is, of course, that he wants to get out of this.
Absolutely. He's trying to find an escape route here, I think, or an exit. Absolutely. And both sides are framing it as a victory, aren't they? Anna-Maria, what do you think? How long could this ceasefire last? Do you think it could last another 24 hours, or is it going to go the full 2 weeks, do you think?
I don't think it will really last 2 weeks, because we already saw yesterday that some of the conditions were not met. And that's the problem with the situation there, that nothing is predictable. Everything can change in a matter of hours. And as an energy user, for example, in Europe, we are affected by that constantly, because the more we are importing the LNG, the more we depend on all these geopolitical issues that are outside our own control. So I don't see it happening soon. I would like it to happen soon. I would like that the flows could go, that the war could end, because it's also some humanitarian situation here too, in lots of countries around the world.
Absolutely, we mustn't forget that, the humanitarian issue here, but Arne, if the role of Israel is quite crucial here as well, isn't it? I mean, do you see them stopping their actions in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah? Because that seems to be a sticking point for the Iranians.
They at least showed yesterday that they do not accept the ceasefire. I think we can conclude that. They may be under a lot of pressure now from the US. I hope they are able to exert that pressure. So that could be a part of the solution, that they actually stop the bombings. But I'm not very optimistic on that account. So of course that is one of the sticking points. But I think the whole discussion of what 10-point plan are they actually looking at, it seems like there's more plans out there. There's no coordination. It just makes things very, very uncertain. And yes, this might break down. But we also have to look at the realities on ground. What's the reality? That the reality is that the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. The reality is that there's a lot of US forces in the area. The reality is that Iran is not defeated. They're still able to fire missiles, drones towards their neighbors. And the reality is that the Ras Laffan, the LNG facility, is not operating as we speak.
What? How many ships remain in the Gulf, Anna-Maria? Have you done any research on what, have any passed through the Strait so far? I'm talking LNG tankers in particular.
Yeah, I think, if I'm not wrong, a Greek LNG terminal passed yesterday or the day before yesterday on these days. That's the one that I know. I know that there's some Qatari LNG, 2 of them, that tried to cross and they went back. So yes, there are still some of them that are waiting to be crossed. And what this is creating is also that the prices of that LNG is going, if it crosses and if they have to pay the toll, it's going to be a very expensive LNG.
Exactly. So I think that's another area that I think I'll return to in a second. But when do you expect shipping to resume, if at all? I mean, is there a 2-week window? Will we see LNG tankers moving out of the Gulf, or will they remain because of the problems that Anna-Maria has highlighted there, the expense and the insecurity, etc.?
Yeah, definitely the security situation is the thing for especially the Western companies. Nobody can send vessels through the strait if they don't have security guarantees from US, Iran, and you have like an official statement from the IMO, for example, the International Maritime Organization, that the strait is now safe. You'll probably have some Asian countries, maybe Iran themselves, maybe some Russian tankers going through. I think one of the issues for the LNG is that it's mostly Western companies that actually operate LNG vessels. Another thing that I think is a bit underestimated here is actually that very few vessels would dare to go into the Persian Gulf. You can argue, why should you go into the Persian Gulf? But you need to have vessels going in to pick up LNG, because you're not going to go in the next 2 weeks, because you maybe end up being caught inside the Persian Gulf if this breaks down, and then you are in an even worse place. And then there's the whole congestion issue. You cannot just get all these ships out. It's not just LNG ships, the tankers, the bulk carriers, everything, container ships out in one day. Before the war, around, I think, 130 ships a day crossed the strait. And if you have to go across this Iranian island along the Iranian coastline, we are probably talking maybe 10, 15 vessels a day. This is a logistical nightmare. And then we also have to remember, I think the last LNG ship will arrive in Europe, or maybe it arrived yesterday, and then it will take another month before the next one arrives, at least, because it takes a month before they arrive in Rotterdam area. That's basically the time it takes to go from the Persian Gulf to here. So we are missing out at least a month, and probably more than that. I don't think we will see a normalization of the shipping situation during these 2 weeks. That's logistical impossible, and also from a security issue, not possible. We have to have a firm peace deal before that will happen.
Yeah, because the risks are just too great. No ship owner or insurers are willing to send vessels back in or out.
And of course, you can find some exceptions, some smaller countries, some smaller ship owners and so on, but on a broad scale, no.
Anna, Anna-Maria, what's your view here?
Yes, I agree that I think we are going to start feeling the effect this month onwards. I think in March, we were not confronted with the reality of the energy crisis in Europe, because we were still receiving those cargoes that had left Qatar. In February, we still were receiving those cargoes that were coming from the US. But we already saw in March some cargoes that were diverted from Europe to Asia. Yeah, we saw some US cargoes, we saw some Nigerian even cargoes. So, and then if we are still going to have no Qatari LNG, from this month onwards is when we are going to start feeling the effect of the crisis in the continent. Also, we know that our storage is very low, has been the lowest in the last 3-4 years. So we have to refill storage. Yeah. So that also will demand more LNG imports at that moment. The capacity to import more gas pipeline is already full. There's not much buffer there where you could import more gas pipeline. We know we are coming up to the ban on Russian gas. So that's a situation that we have to be aware this year, that we really need to start implementing policies on replacing that gas demand, because we are going to be confronted with a very, very, very strong crisis if we don't start acting right now.
Absolutely, Anna Maria. And what for you, Arne, what does reopening of the Strait of Hormuz actually look like in practice?
In practice, I don't think it's going to be reopened 100% as it was before. Of what we have seen so far is the situation. I have read some articles also that the situation is going to be completely different to the one we had in before March, in February, January, where there were lots of vessels going both ways, with no restriction at all. Now, we don't know exactly what this toll, if it's going to be implemented, will mean. Also, maybe we will going to see, I read also some articles that we are going to see more, maybe pipelines being built to bypass the crossing of the Strait of Hormuz. So maybe in the medium, longer term, the situation will be different too. There's an effort to diminish the importance of this choke point.
Absolutely, Anna Maria. What's your point? How do you see this, Arne?
I think Anna Maria pointed to a very important thing, that these LNG vessels that turning to Asia, is a reflection of that at the moment, and I think that will be the case for the rest of the year, there's a big competition between Asia and Europe for LNG. And what basically happened during March, and why did these vessels turn around? Because Asia was bidding up the price. So the so-called netback, and netback from US, because US is now the big supplier of LNG, it is more attractive to send LNG to Asia than it is to send it to Europe. The netback is what is left after you pay the US gas, you pay the gasification and the shipping cost. Then there's a better pickup, a better netback sending vessels to Asia. And we will see this bidding war, in my view, during this year. It will not be as bad, I think, as in 2022. Remember when TTF prices were 275 euros per megawatt hour, but it will continue. And as Anna Maria said, Europe, we have to refill our inventories. They are at a very low level, even below the 2022 level. So that is a bit of a dilemma. We need to refill, but we also have to avoid bidding up prices too much. But that is what's going on in the moment, this kind of bidding war. And we have been losing out on that. But it doesn't mean there are still LNG ships coming to Europe, and the netback is more equal at the moment. But it changes by the day.
But market prices so far aren't really pricing in this risk of a supply squeeze this summer or later this year, Arne. So we've seen the price around 50, between highs of 70, but very far from what we saw in 2022. Do you think markets are underestimating the risks here?
I think they're underestimating, but I also think we have to be careful saying that this is not as bad as 2022. No, it's not as bad as 2022, but it's a bit like saying that, a recession is not bad because it's not as bad as the depression in the 1930s. The 2022 was an exceptional situation, but gas at 50 or 60 or 45 euros a megawatt hour is still a nightmare for the industrial sector in Europe that are dependent on gas. Remember, the gas price has barely moved, or if anything, actually a bit lower in the US during this. So from a competition point of view, this is certainly the last thing that especially the German energy-intensive gas consumers need. So yes, it doesn't bring them much comfort to saying, but it's not as bad as 2022. It is quite bad also at 45 or 50 and 60. And I think there is a concern that is going. We can also say about how's the forward curve looking if we look at TTF or THE, the German gas. It's very flat for this year. That's very different from what you see, for example, in the oil or gas oil futures, where you have the so-called backwardation, that the forward prices are lower because you believe that over time the situation will solve. So the high price is high today. Brent is around $100 today. That's a June contract. The dated Brent is 120 plus, but December you can buy Brent at $80. So that's called backwardation, right? But in gas, we just see prices move up and down for 2026 in a parallel shift. And it underlines exactly what Anna-Maria is saying, that what we are doing at the moment, we are pushing in front of us a bigger and bigger problem, that we need to refill these inventories that unfortunately are a very low level after a damn cold winter. And that's why if we have an issue today in the spot, it affects the winter prices next winter, because it moves things up and down, because that's where the issue will arise. And then another thing which is a consequence of the war is, of course, that the destruction of the 2 LNG trains in Qatar means that the whole outlook for the LNG market, in my view, have changed for the next couple of years. We were looking into a situation where the market will be abundant with LNG, a lot of US LNG coming to the market, that will still be coming to the market, but it cannot make up for the missing LNG from Qatar. So we're looking into a much tighter market, not just next winter, but also in 2027, maybe also in 2028. So if there's a market that has really been turned upside down by the war, it is the LNG market. And when the LNG market is turned upside down, the TTF market, the European gas market in general, is also turned upside down. So that's probably where you see the biggest impact of the war on a medium to long-term basis.
Not just short-term, but the short-term issue is also quite critical here as well, Arne. Would you say that prices could go as high as 100 this year, 100 euros per megawatt hour on the TTF? Is that something that's realistic?
Yeah. I think that we shouldn't certainly not rule that out. I think we were at 70, so certainly that is a possibility, especially if we get to the autumn and we still are missing LNG from Asia, big competition from the rest, or from the Persian Gulf, big competition from Asia, and we haven't been able to sort of fill up to a reasonable level for the inventories. Yes, then the 100 handle comes into play. I'm pretty sure we will not see the prices we saw in 2022.
But there's room for upward direction, put it that way.
I'm afraid. Yes, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Anna-Maria, what's your take on that? What kind of direction could prices move in?
Yeah, I think it depends on the escalation of the crisis, and that's a big issue. We can see that when we compare it with the 22 crisis, the prices went up in August. So a few months later, because the escalation was there, Another situation, in 2022, we were depending almost 45% from one supplier, and that was the biggest risk. Now, we have reduced gas demand by almost 17-18%. So that has helped quite a lot to diminish the effect of this crisis, and also because we are importing from other sources. But the gas that is lost into the market is more than the gas that was lost in 2022. So that is what is important. We are not seeing the effect directly because this is a global LNG market that goes to all the suppliers. But as a whole, as the deficit of gas into the market is more than what we lost in 2022. So if this war escalates, it could become a very, very critical energy situation for all of us.
And Anna-Maria, sorry to interrupt, but do you think it will escalate then? That this is 2 weeks, the ceasefire won't last 2 wees, and we're back to full war?
Honestly, I don't want to give my word on that, because we have seen that, as I said, something's happening in the morning, in the afternoon, something is different. We are noticing that now there's a power there. There's a fight for power. For the control of the Strait of Hormuz, the control of that's controlling right now the Strait of Hormuz. You are controlling the oil and gas market globally. So there's a little bit of problem here. So I don't know. I really am not political, very wise, but I can just see that the situation keeps changing, and that is what it gives more risk to the market, because there's very volatile right now.
Very little certainty, very little predictability. It's just very, very fast moving, very dynamic and ever changing and unpredictable, as many things with President Trump. But Arne, you were going to come in here and comment.
I think Maria said it herself that the LNG market is a global market, ex Northern America. So we shouldn't be looking too much into that. Oh, maybe Europe doesn't import that much LNG from the Persian Gulf, because it doesn't matter, because the LNG market is a global market outside North America. Where I'm afraid of the escalation is that Iran has shown that they are ready to attack these trains at Qatar, at the South Pass field, and it's just across the Persian Gulf. And if they want to escalate, what can they do? They can close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into the Red Sea. They can attack energy facilities in the Persian Gulf, and the Qatarian LNG facilities are part of that, and they can actually incur a lot of pain to the global economy doing that. It's a bit sad, but actually those who will win from that is actually the US, because they are LNG producers. It's actually Israel, because they're also a gas producer. But I don't think they think about that.
So in terms of the Qatari LNG production and export, what's a realistic timeline for production to restart, and what are the key hurdles, do you think, that could slow that process down?
First of all, as Anna Maria said, the two trains, there are 14 trains at the Ras Laffan, it's called, right, facility. Qatari Energy said themselves that it would take 3 to 5 years to restart them, and I don't think we have any reason to believe that they are underestimating the impact, or overstating the impacting. So I think that's a fair assessment. So that is out. It also means that expanding production is probably out of the question. The facility is completely closed down now. I hear everything from 2 to 6 months time to restart it. I don't know, Anna Maria, if you have a better number there, but it seems to be in that area. But they need to have a security, a stable security that they will not face new missiles. And apparently they don't see that yet. So we are potentially talking summer or even autumn before LNG is starting to come out of the Persian Gulf in any meaningful way. And in a worst case scenario, Europe and the global economy will have to live without the Qatarian LNG for over the summer, going into the autumn, through the whole refilling season in Europe. That's a bit of a concern to me, because then the bidding war for LNG will continue.
Absolutely. And what a final question, really, because we're running a bit out of time, unfortunately, for this special episode. But Anna Maria, what do you think the wider impact is going to be on the sort of global energy system? Do you think there's going to be bigger push in certain markets, such as the European energy market, to accelerate the energy transition and move away from fossil fuels and the dependency on gas, for example? Or will it slow it down and people look for alternative suppliers?
Well, I think it's going to accelerate the transition. I think, I tell you even personally, right now I'm installing a heat pump here at home. I think what this crisis is telling us is that we are very much dependent on every global outcome. Every global crisis is affecting our energy market. We are not energy independent. So the only way that we become more energy independent is we can produce our own energy. And with renewables, with wind farms, yes, you have to buy a one-off investment, but you don't have to buy every month the fuel for the wind farm, so you reduce the risk. You reduce the risk of importing a fuel. So what we need to do is, how can we reduce that risk? How can we be more isolated from all these crises? Because we had a crisis in January. We are now having another crisis. Even if the Strait of Hormuz is reopened and everything is solved, in 6 months' time, we could have another crisis. So that is what is showing us the situation right now, that we are constantly dependent on outside crises that are affecting our own energy, are putting the prices up as end user. We are paying quite a lot for the gas and the electricity. So we need to think, how can that be reduced? And mainly, how can we increase our own energy security and energy independence?
Absolutely, Anna-Maria. And the final word from you, Arne. How do you think this fresh crisis is going to change the sort of global energy system here? I mean, there's going to be, people aren't going to factor in this incredible uncertainty, predictability. That's not what industrials want. That's not what utilities want. It's not what households want, is it?
No, yeah. First of all, I think we have moved from where we were dependent, if seen from a European perspective or global perspective, dependent on Russia. That was not a good idea. It turned out maybe it was not a good idea to be dependent on the Middle East. It was not this stable supplier. I think that's actually the biggest concern of countries like the Emirates and the Saudis, that they are no longer seen as reliable suppliers. And we are now moving to be dependent on the US, and you can think about that what you want, but I'm a bit concerned about that. And then I fully agree with Anna-Maria that this will support the green transition, both from a sort of green perspective, but also because the transition is geopolitics. I think we'll also see more focus in Europe and Asia, for that matter, on producing own fossil fuels. It's a part of the solution, whether we like it or not, to do that. And then it's correct that demand is also a part of the solution. The sad thing is, unfortunately, that a lot of the drop we have seen in gas demand, for example, in Europe since 2022, it's actually from the industrial side. Something is transition, but it's also closing down of energy-heavy production, especially in Germany. I think if you look at industrial production in energy-intensive industrial production in Germany, it's down, I think it's 23% since the beginning of 2023. So it's more than 1/5 has been wiped out. And it's not like that production doesn't exist anymore. It just exists in other places of the world. And of course, that doesn't do any good for the climate. So that's the issue here. We should have demand destruction, but we should have demand destruction that are in the right way, that we actually change into, for example, electricity. That is also happening, definitely. But unfortunately, that's also happening that industrial production is basically moving out.
Well, Anna-Maria and Arne, thank you very much for joining the Plugged In podcast. I feel we could talk for hours, but we have to draw this to a close today. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
And to you listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of Plugged In. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, rate and follow to make sure you get the latest podcast episodes as soon as we release them every Thursday. We'd also love to read your reviews of the podcast. It helps us to keep up to date with what you, our listeners, think of the podcast and what content you want to receive more of. Finally, you can head to montelnews.com for more news and analysis from our team of journalists across Europe and beyond. See you next time.